Close your eyes. Forget everything you think you know about Cleopatra. Forget the movies. Forget the propaganda. Forget the myths written by her enemies. Because Cleopatra was not remembered for who she was remembered for how dangerous she was. Dangerous to empires, dangerous to men in power, dangerous to Rome itself. This is the true story of Cleopatra VII Philopatra, an African queen, a master strategist, a scholar, a ruler. And by the end of this documentary, you will understand one truth. Cleopatra was not a seductress. She was a sovereign. Cleopatra was born in 69 BCE in Alexandria, Egypt. But Egypt was already ancient. When Cleopatra took her first breath, the pyramids were already 2,500 years old. Egypt was Africa's crown jewel, a land of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. This was Kemet, the Black Land, and Cleopatra inherited Africa's oldest throne at a time when the world was changing. Rome was rising, empires were shifting, and Egypt stood in the crosshairs. Cleopatra belonged to the Ptolemaic dynasty, descendants of Ptolemy, one of Alexander the Great's generals. But here is what history often hides. The Ptolemies ruled Egypt, yet Cleopatra was the first of her line to fully embrace Egyptian identity. She spoke 9 languages, including ancient Egyptian, which her ancestors refused to learn. She dressed as Isis, not as a Greek queen. She ruled as Pharaoh, not a foreign governor. Cleopatra did not reject Africa. She claimed it. From childhood, Cleopatra was trained not for marriage, but for power. She studied philosophy, rhetoric, mathematics, astronomy, economics, political psychology. She learned how empires think. She understood one brutal truth early. Rome does not respect weakness. Cleopatra would never be weak. At 18 years old, Cleopatra became co-ruler with her brother Ptolemy XIII. But Egypt's court was poisonous. Advisors feared her intelligence. Generals feared her independence. Men feared her authority. Within 3 years, Cleopatra was betrayed. Exiled from Alexandria, stripped of power, declared an enemy of the state. But Cleopatra did not run. She planned. In 48 BCE, Rome arrived at Egypt's door. Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the world, entered Alexandria. Cleopatra knew this moment would define history. She did not beg Caesar. She strategized. Legend says she had herself smuggled into Caesar's chambers inside a carpet, not as a lover, but as a statement. When Caesar saw her, he did not see beauty first, he saw intelligence. Cleopatra did not seduce Caesar. She outplayed him. She offered Egypt's wealth, its grain supply, its strategic position. In return, she demanded her throne. Caesar agreed. War followed. Ptolemy XIII drowned in the Nile. Cleopatra reclaimed Egypt, not through seduction, but through political mastery. Cleopatra did not return to the throne as a survivor. She returned as pharaoh. Not symbolic, not ceremonial, absolute. Coins were minted with her face, not beside a man. Edicts were signed in her name, not her brother's. Temples honored her as Isis incarnate. Egypt prospered. The Nile flooded on time. Grain filled the storehouses. Trade flowed from Nubia to the Mediterranean. Cleopatra ruled not with fear, but with competence. Rome noticed. Cleopatra understood something few rulers ever do. Rome was not one man. Rome was an idea built on expansion, extraction, control. She knew Egypt could not defeat Rome by force, so she chose influence. Egypt would not fight Rome. It would entangle Rome. And then came Mark Antony. Mark Antony was not Julius Caesar. Where Caesar was cold and calculated, Antony was emotional, charismatic, ambitious. He ruled the eastern half of Rome's empire, and in 41 BCE, he summoned Cleopatra, not as a queen, as a subject. Cleopatra did not arrive humbly. She arrived on a golden barge, sails dyed purple, perfume filling the air, dressed as Isis. This was not seduction. This was psychological warfare. Antony was overwhelmed. Cleopatra and Antony did not fall into romance. They formed an alliance. Egypt had wealth, Antony had armies. Together, they envisioned something Rome could not tolerate: an Eastern Empire, African-centered, independent of Rome. Cleopatra bore Antony children, not for love, for dynasty. Rome panicked. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, watched from Rome, and he understood something dangerous. Rome could not defeat Cleopatra with armies alone, so it defeated her with stories. They called her a witch, a seductress, a foreign temptress, a threat to Roman masculinity. They raised her intelligence. They reduced her power to beauty. This was propaganda, and it worked. In 31 BCE, war erupted. The Battle of Actium. Octavian's fleet versus Antony and Cleopatra. The sea burned with fire. Ships collided. Men drowned screaming. Cleopatra saw the truth before Antony did. The battle was lost. She withdrew Egypt's fleet. Antony followed her. Rome declared this cowardice, but it was strategy. Unfortunately, it came too late. Rome marched on Alexandria. Allies defected. Generals surrendered. Egypt stood alone. Antony, broken by propaganda and despair, took his own life. Cleopatra held him as he died. She did not scream. She calculated. Octavian wanted Cleopatra alive, not as a queen, as a trophy. He planned to parade her through Rome in chains. Cleopatra understood. This was not defeat. This was humiliation, and Cleopatra had never been humiliated. Cleopatra bathed. She dressed in royal garments. She wrote letters, and then she chose death, not because she was weak, but because she refused to be owned. Rome would conquer Egypt, but it would never conquer her dignity. Octavian became Augustus. Egypt became Rome's property. Cleopatra's children were erased. Her image was rewritten. Rome destroyed her statues, burned her records, mocked her legacy. But history remembers what power tries to bury. Cleopatra was not perfect, but she was brilliant. She spoke truth to empire. She defended African sovereignty. She ruled in a man's world and terrified it. They could not defeat her mind, so they attacked her memory. But memory survives. Cleopatra stands as proof that Africa produced rulers equal to any empire, that intelligence is more dangerous than armies, that legacy is not decided by victors alone. History did not kill Cleopatra, fear did, and fear is the greatest compliment power can pay to intelligence.